Have you ever felt invisible? Like the world walks right past you even when you've given everything? Today, we're sharing a powerful story about a quiet hero, a father, whose moment of immense pride was almost overshadowed by a heartbreaking dismissal. It's a tale that reminds us that true honor isn't always recognized with fanfare, but sometimes it takes a son's unwavering love and the unbreakable bond of brotherhood to reveal the heart of a true champion. Prepare to be moved by the story of Master Sergeant Daniel R. Beck, a man who showed up on time with honor and a quiet pride no uniform could capture, and whose simple desire to see his son graduate stirred something profound in everyone who witnessed it. The auditorium pulsed with energy, hundreds of families rising to their feet, voices raised in joy, banners fluttering, camera phones held high to capture a moment they'd remember forever. In the center of this celebration, unnoticed by most, stood a solitary figure at the very back. He was tall, with a posture forged from discipline, and wore an old Marine Corps dress jacket, its medals long since removed, over a pair of worn, faded jeans. His boots were scuffed, his hands were calloused, and his expression, though unreadable, carried the weight of years. He moved slowly down the aisle, his gaze scanning the crowd until he reached the edge of the front rows, marked by ropes and polished signage, reserved for honored guests. As he stepped toward an empty seat, a woman wearing a headset intercepted him. "Sir, this section is for guests of honor only," she said, her voice clipped and firm, practiced like someone who had said it 100 times today. He tried to explain, his voice low but steady. "My son is graduating today. I'm on his list." She didn't even glance at the clipboard in her hand. Her eyes scanned him instead, his wrinkled shirt, the rough lines carved into his face, the fatigue in his eyes. "I don't care who you are," she said coolly. "Step back now or security will remove you." Two security guards were already approaching from the aisle, alerted by her subtle nod. Their movements were measured, not aggressive, but definite. The surrounding crowd remained oblivious to the situation, too caught up in joy and anticipation to notice the small scene playing out. But one row did, fifth from the front, 6 men sitting quietly, their backs straight, their expressions unreadable. They watched everything. They said nothing, not yet. His name was Daniel R. Beck, retired Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. 22 years of service, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, a third of his hearing lost to an IED blast. He'd spent 6 months removing shrapnel from his side, and he had buried more brothers in arms than he allowed himself to remember. But nothing, no mission, no battle, no loss, had ever made him feel the way he felt now. Displaced, dismissed, invisible. Today wasn't about war, it wasn't about medals or ranks, it was about his son, Tyler Beck. The boy he raised, the man who was now becoming the first in their family to graduate from college. Not from boot camp, not from officer training, from college. Daniel had never finished high school himself. Tyler was breaking the cycle. Daniel hadn't cried in years, decades even. But when that invitation had arrived, handwritten by Tyler, with uneven letters that read, "Dad, I want you in the front row," something inside him broke. He'd folded the card gently and tucked it into the inside pocket of his Marine jacket, where it had stayed ever since. He'd driven from 3 states away, slept in his truck overnight in the university parking lot, the same truck that had once carried Tyler to Little League games, to the recruiter's office, and finally to move-in day at college. He hadn't asked for a hotel room. He didn't want to cause trouble. He didn't tell anyone he was coming. He simply showed up, as he always had, quiet, proud, present. The dress jacket wasn't for show. It was the best piece of clothing he owned, the only thing he had that felt formal enough for a day like this. He didn't bring flowers or balloons, just the truck, the invitation, and the hope of seeing his son cross the stage. The venue was bigger than he expected. Families filled every row, fathers in suits, mothers in dresses, siblings buzzing with excitement. The sectioned-off rows up front were marked by crisp signage and separated with red velvet ropes. Daniel remained off to the side, scanning for a familiar face. Tyler had told him his name would be on the list. "You'll be up front, right next to my name," he had said, But when Daniel approached the usher and mentioned his son's name, she barely acknowledged him. One quick look at his clothes, another at the weathered face beneath his cap. That was all she needed. "Sorry, sir, this area is for families," she said, her voice polite but practiced. "I am family," Daniel answered. His voice didn't rise. It didn't falter. "I'm his father." Her expression didn't change. Her body shifted slightly as the guard stepped closer behind her. Daniel didn't protest. A lifetime in uniform had trained him to obey, to step aside when told, to keep his head down and move along. But as he shifted out of the way, something beneath the surface stirred, a sensation colder than fear or embarrassment. It crawled up his spine and prickled at the back of his neck, like he was being watched by something invisible, judged without a word spoken. He moved as instructed, settling quietly by a side door near the auditorium's edge. He didn't sit. He simply stood there, hands clasped behind him, boots shoulder-width apart, back straight, gaze locked on the stage. He might have looked out of place in his worn Marine Corps jacket, but his posture held the quiet dignity of a man who had stood guard over things that mattered. And even if no one in that room saw it, he was still proud, still waiting. The front rows were filled with parents in tailored suits and elegant dresses, their shoes polished to a mirror shine, holding neatly folded programs in their laps. Not one of them looked at him, not directly. Their glances slid off him like rain off a waxed car, deliberate, indifferent, almost rehearsed. To them, he was just some old man lingering where he shouldn't be, a leftover from another era, someone whose presence didn't quite fit the pristine, photo-ready image of the day. He didn't see the men in row 5, but they saw him. 3 of them, seated close together, eyes sharp and alert despite their civilian clothes, were watching. They didn't move, didn't speak. Not yet, but they noticed. A voice crackled through the sound system, smooth and rehearsed, announcing the beginning of the ceremony. It welcomed the dignitaries, faculty, and proud parents, as if reading from a script. A sea of people settled into their seats and practiced synchrony, the gentle rustling of clothes and shifting chairs filling the air for a moment, before silence reclaimed the room. But Daniel remained standing, unmoving, unmoved. He didn't need a seat. After 2 decades in the Corps, he was more comfortable on his feet than most people were in padded chairs. He didn't need a program either. He knew exactly why he was here, and he would not miss a second of it. An usher passed by, this time with another staff member in tow. They walked slowly, whispering just loud enough for him to hear, though they didn't realize that. "He's still standing there," the first woman said under her breath. "I don't think he was even invited." The other glanced back over her shoulder. "Just get security to keep an eye on him." A few heads nearby turned, subtle but noticeable. Eyebrows lifted, lips pursed. Whispered judgments floated through the air like pollen. But Daniel didn't react. He had stood watch in worse conditions, at the edge of grave sites, in burning deserts, beneath screaming artillery. A few uncomfortable stares meant nothing to him. He stood firm, calm as stone. Then, from behind the curtain, a student stepped out in cap and gown. The room shifted slightly as everyone leaned in to listen. The young man approached the podium with practiced confidence, every movement precise, every word carefully shaped. He was the dean's son, bright, charismatic, every bit the poster child of the institution. He began his speech with effusive thanks to the families and faculty who had supported the graduates. Then, with a slight dramatic pause and a polished smile, he added, "Especially the presentable ones who represent the values we teach." Laughter broke out. Polite, light, controlled. But not everyone laughed. Daniel didn't flinch. Not a single muscle twitched. But in the 5th row, the 3 men in dark suits exchanged a glance. The tallest of them leaned forward slightly and murmured, "That one was for him." The others nodded, barely, silently. Near the wall, a security guard appeared beside Daniel, clipboard in hand, and a practiced smile on his face. "Sir," he said with forced politeness, "we've had some concerns raised. Would you mind stepping outside with me until we can verify your name on the list?" Daniel's voice was steady, low, calm. "I'm not causing trouble. My son asked me to be here. I won't leave until I see him walk across that stage." The guard didn't escalate, but his tone grew firmer. "I'm going to have to ask you again, sir. Please come with me." In the audience, the whisper started again, faint at first, then rippling outward. "They're asking that man to leave," one woman murmured. Another leaned towards her friend, a note of disapproval in her voice. "Honestly, it's making people uncomfortable." Daniel heard them, every word, every breath of judgment, but he didn't turn around, didn't lower his chin, didn't move. He was still standing. The guard gave a subtle nod and exhaled slowly. "All right." He turned and began walking, and Daniel followed without resistance. No objections, no fuss, just quiet, resigned obedience. But just as they reached the edge of the aisle, a sharp sound broke the hush. A chair scraped against the floor. Then another, and another. In the fifth row, 6 men rose all at once. No uniforms, no words, just presence. Their chests squared, arms resting calmly at their sides, their eyes locked forward. They weren't angry, they were intentional, deliberate in a way that carried more weight than fury ever could. Heads turned, murmurs rippled through the room, confusion mounting. The tallest of the 6 stepped into the aisle, calm, composed. He approached the security guard escorting Daniel. From his pocket, he drew something, small but unmistakable, and raised it silently. A Navy SEAL Trident badge. Another man stepped forward, did the same. Then another. All 6 of them, one after another, revealing their badges. Symbols of war, of elite brotherhood, held high in complete silence. No one moved. Then the tallest among them turned toward the audience. His gaze swept across the rows, calm, cold, assessing, like a man used to reading battlefield terrain, not faces. When he finally spoke, his voice cut clean through the noise, not loud but unwavering, carrying the unmistakable edge of someone who had once given orders in chaos. "That man doesn't leave this room. He didn't need to raise his voice. He led us through hell. He's staying right here." It was as if the very atmosphere shifted, not abruptly, but entirely, as though every person in that room had just remembered something they'd never known they'd forgotten. The 6 remained rooted, unmoving. Their stance wasn't aggressive. It was sacred, protective. They stood the way brothers do when one of their own is being dismissed by a world that's forgotten his worth. The guard glanced from one face to the next, then down at the trident badge he still held in his hand. His fingers loosened slightly. He stepped back. I didn't know," he said. The tall SEAL didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence was its own answer. Then a voice, soft but sure, came from somewhere in the audience. "Who is he?" someone whispered. From near the stage, a man rose to his feet. He wore a dress uniform, heavy with medals, his posture stiff with age and memory. He looked straight ahead as he spoke, not loud, but his words carried across the room like a flag lifted in the wind. "That man is Master Sergeant Daniel Beck, 3rd Recon, Operation Phantom Sun Fallujah. The only man who walked back out of that street after pulling 5 of us out under fire." The air cracked. Audible gasps followed. A phone slipped and clattered to the floor in the back row. Daniel didn't move. Not even a flicker. He hadn't moved at all since the 6 had stood. His head dipped ever so slightly, jaw clenched. He wasn't upset. He wasn't proud. He was just exhausted, tired of having to prove who he was. And then a voice rang out through the sound system. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't expected. It was Tyler, Daniel's son, stepping forward from the line of graduates on stage, clutching a microphone in both hands. His cap was slightly askew and his voice cracked on the first word. But he didn't falter. "That's my dad." Silence dropped like a curtain. Tyler walked forward to the edge of the stage. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice grew steadier with each word. He never asked to be honored. He never told stories or demanded thanks. But every morning for the past 4 years, he looked me in the eye and told me to stand tall, to keep going, to be someone I could be proud of. His breath caught, his eyes locked on his father. Today was supposed to be my graduation, but the truth is the only reason I made it here is because of him. I'm proud because he's my father, and if he's not welcome here. Tyler reached up, took off his graduation cap, and held it in both hands. Then I'm not either. And with that, he stepped off the stage, down the stairs, straight toward his father. The crowd split to let him through. Tyler stood tall when he reached his father, shoulders squared, chest out, eyes locked. Then, with firm precision, he raised his hand and saluted. One after another, the 6 SEALs behind him did the same, silent and absolute in their gesture. Daniel R. Beck, however, didn't return the salute. He stepped forward, drew his son into a quiet embrace, and murmured into his ear, "You didn't have to do that." Tyler answered without hesitation, "No, Dad, they needed to see it." The entire auditorium seemed to freeze in that instant, not out of surprise, but something weightier, heavier. A hush descended, thick with unspoken truths. The woman who had once dismissed Daniel at the door now stared blankly at her clipboard, her presence shrinking as though she wished to vanish into the page. The parents who had earlier looked past him as if he were just an unwelcome shadow now shifted awkwardly in their chairs. Some averted their eyes ashamed. Others dared to meet his gaze with something closer to reverence, an understanding that came too late, but was no less sincere for its delay. Without a word, Tyler guided his father toward the front rows. This time, there was no resistance. No one blocked their path. The same usher who had waved Daniel away earlier now moved aside, lips sealed. She didn't apologize, but she didn't have to. Daniel walked past her with steady steps, untouched by bitterness. His silence said everything. He didn't require their words. His presence alone had already called them forth and made them swallow them in silence. The 6 SEALs followed closely behind. None of them took their seats. They stood instead, just behind the front row, arms folded across their chests like guardians of the moment, soldiers on a different kind of duty. One of them glanced toward the audience and muttered, almost as if to himself, "About time." Up at the podium, the dean approached the microphone, his face pale, hands gripping the edges of his neatly printed speech. He cast a quick glance at the group now commanding the room, then looked back at the microphone. He opened his mouth to speak, but the first words faltered. Uh, we, we are honored today to welcome many distinguished guests, including some we should have recognized earlier." There was a flicker of applause, hesitant, uneven. Then a few more joined in, and then more still. It grew, not out of obligation, but from the slow, rolling weight of realization. Row after row joined in until the sound filled the hall. Not for the dean, not for the graduates, but for something else entirely. Something unspoken, long overdue. The applause was no longer about celebration. It was about acknowledgement. But Daniel didn't absorb it. He didn't puff his chest or scan the crowd for approval. He simply sat down beside Tyler, quiet, composed. He slipped the invitation his son had written out of his coat pocket, read it once more, then tucked it away again. That was why he had come. Not for the applause, not for recognition, just for that chair, just for that moment beside his son. When the ceremony ended, there was no rush for the exits, no stampede of cameras or chatter. Students walked by Daniel slowly, a few reaching out to shake his hand, others offering only a respectful nod. One mother paused, laid her hand gently on his shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for raising him right." As the crowd gradually thinned, the 6 SEALs returned. One of them stepped forward and placed something small in Daniel's hand. He looked down. It was a unit challenge coin, simple, heavy with meaning. Daniel turned it over in his fingers. The man said quietly, "You were always the standard. We never forgot." Daniel didn't say anything. He just closed his fingers around the coin, gave a single nod, and looked at Tyler. And for the first time that day, a smile crossed his face. He never asked for attention, never raised his voice, never demanded recognition. He simply showed up. On time, with integrity, with a pride so deeply rooted it didn't need a uniform to be seen. And when others tried to cast him aside, those who remembered him stood up, not because he insisted, but because they owed it to him. Some heroes don't need a stage, or a spotlight, or a speech. Sometimes all they need is to be seen. So I ask you, have you ever known someone like Daniel Beck? Someone the world ignored until the silence made it impossible to forget? The noise around them fades when stories like his rise above the chatter, quiet, steady, and impossible to ignore. Maybe you've seen someone like him before, someone who stood just a little straighter when the anthem played, someone whose silence carried the weight of things most of us can't imagine. Maybe you didn't know their name. Maybe you never spoke. But something about the way they held themselves stayed with you, long after they'd slipped out of sight. Tell us who they were. Leave their name. Speak their legacy aloud. Because here at Veterans Voice, we don't believe in asking for respect. We believe in earning it, in recognizing it, and in making sure no one forgets. Thanks for being here. If this story reached you, if it stirred something deep inside, pass it on. Subscribe. Share it. Help us keep honoring those who gave everything, who stood tall when it counted, and who kept showing us how to live with quiet courage no matter who was watching. And the next time you find yourself in a crowded room, take a second look. That quiet figure standing off to the side, he might just be the reason that